And to try to come up with topical. I had to do a lot of research on Taylor Swift to write that question. Like, what she has written. Are you a no, that I mean, that is the question, and the answer is no, not at all. So, I had to look up basic like what are some
that assignment
and where
is hard, the one we did with time three. Yeah, that was hard. That was hard.
Yeah, there's no there's gonna be some
Did you run into that all
I
or
think the
no?
reason I used it but I had to get look on questions. This is actually already on and I was like so ahead of that.
So instead of based on down, she's right. Greater.
Okay, so we will be doing midterm review.
Oh, okay. You created actually value instead of going off of a whole user. Yeah, and it.
All right, folks, welcome. I'm gonna get started on the dot because last year this ran overtime. All right, so the goal today is the midterm review. If you feel like you are already 100% set on the midterm, you're gonna ace it, you can go, that's fine. Yeah, it's funny, right? But the fact that none of you have gotten up to leave suggests that you are potentially interested in doing better on the midterm than you would otherwise. And if that's you, which again, literally all of you did not leave. If that's you, you might consider potentially doing more preparation than merely sitting in this lecture for this hour and a half. So just saying, you may want to pick some structured method to review the content. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and force you to do anything. It's a free country. You get the grade you get, though. I will say that I recommend using the study guide. I will also say that when you are studying, the number one most important part of studying is that there be some point in the process where you check whether you actually know the answer. And if you find that that step never comes up, if you know all the answers, it's probably that your study method is garbage. I mean, or that you can just walk into the midterm with no studying and ace it. But if that's not where you're at emotionally, again, you'll know the study method is working if you find that there's stuff you don't know. How exactly you do that? Lots of options. You could make yourself flashcards. You could ask yourself questions. One thing you could do is you could try to write a little quiz for yourself. Now, in today's day and age, the miracles and wonders of the modern world are upon us. You don't even have to write the practice quiz, okay? Here's what I did. I went to ChatGPT. I said, please put me on HTML elements for a midterm I have coming up. Here's the ones I need to know. Copy and paste these bullet points. And look at that, On it went. All right. What's the purpose of the doc type HTML declaration? That's a good question. Think for 5 seconds, try to answer it for yourself. What is the purpose of the doc type HTML declaration? And if you find that in your brain you're not generating any content at all, sounds like something you might want to know for the midterm. I mean, look, ChatGPT, sometimes it makes stuff up, sometimes it's wrong, sometimes it's crazy. We all know it, right? But this doesn't seem too hard to track down this bit of information. So I would say if you put it in the first line of your HTML, that's what makes it an HTML file. And if you don't put it, some weird stuff happens. And then it asks, which HTML tag is used to provide metadata about the document? Another good question, so think about it for 5 seconds. I'd say maybe the meta tag, so maybe there's also the link tag and the title tag. I guess those could qualify, but probably it means the meta tag because that's why I use the word metadata. So again, minimal effort. I did not even have to generate a list of questions. Just answer. And the best thing is, if you want more, you could just say, give me more questions. Okay. And this is here. I purposefully use the free ChatGPT. Eventually it'll kick you out, but it's a lot of questions. And you can do the same thing down here with all right, here's the next one. You don't see me pretty rude to ChatGPT. you know, it's a computer. One day they'll all rise up, they'll kill us all. That's the judgment day. They'll find out how rude you have been to computers throughout your life. But until then, you can get a good grade on your midterm. You could just say, okay, here's some more, just copy and paste the same prompt. I just said, here's literally, this is copy and paste that paragraph from the study guide. And it generated some questions. It's like, why is maintaining a proper heading hierarchy important for accessibility? Think for 10 seconds. I would say it's important because people who are using screen readers and potentially like search engines or some other tools, they use that heading hierarchy to know like what's where in the document, and you like jump to a particular heading. So it's important to keep that later. Again, this is but one of many ways that you could study. This is a pretty lazy way. It's maybe not as targeted as some of the others, but like, it's fine, man. And again, the goal of this process is to find the things that you don't know. It's really easy to read the question and say to yourself, yep, I know that, let's move on. The reason that doesn't work is you're not actually finding the places that you don't. Really important to actually get questions wrong. That's how you know the study is doing something. And then of course you get them right the next time. All right. So again, that's my exhortation to all of you to study more than ever before. There are ways to study for a test like this with like relatively minimal effort. Okay. You didn't even have to take notes all semester. You can just do this. And actually, I would say that like rereading your notes, etc. Most studies show that's a pretty low value method of studying, because again, when you're rereading your notes, it's not that often that you're running into something where you say like, oh, I really didn't know that. It's really easy to kind of tell yourself that you knew stuff that you only sort of knew. And it's the stuff that you only sort of knew that you're not going to reproduce on the test. So that's like an easy way to, and also the place where studying can really help. Like if you're like, oh man, I've never produced a Flexbox design and I never will. Maybe that's not the highest value for studying, but like the 3 HTML tags you don't know, they're pretty easy to backfill and that can get you a big bump on the test. All right, like I said, we got a lot of content to get through, so that's my exhortation. Let's start by reviewing some HTML. So the way this is going to work, we'll go through the questions, and each of the questions, I mean, these are questions / list / whatever. I'm going to ask you to think for like 15, 20 seconds. That's not going to be enough time to answer every part of the question because there's usually like 10 or 20. I just want you to mentally go through the process of actually saying each of the answers you would give to each part. I just want you to practice that so that when you go home, you review this on your own. And I've set up all the slides, the question and the answer are on separate slides. So here's the question. I want you to spend 15 seconds, just go through as many of these as you can. What does that element do? All right, if you're like me, you got through about the first 2 rows. Okay, but I want to emphasize that this isn't something that should take you forever. You can actually review a lot of this. By the way, if you take this slide, which is up on Canvas, you print it out, and then you just go through each of them, and for the one that you can explain what the element is, you put a little check mark, and the one you couldn't, just put an X. That shows you what you need to practice. Okay, so I'm going to put my answers up on the screen for all the elements. This, I think, is every single element you need to know. There's an empty spot, so that's probably true. So I think this is every single element you need to know. I'm going to put the answers on the screen. This is going to be a little weird, but I'm going to ask you to read the answers together with me. I'll do the first one, and then we'll keep kind of a steady rhythm. I know it's weird, but I want to force you to actually say out loud. The biggest flaw I see when people study is they just look at the answers and they tell themselves, yep, I knew that. All right, so I want to get you out of this habit. So I'm going to put all the answers on the screen. I'll read through the first one, and then I'd like you to join in. I'm going to try to keep a steady cadence. The A tag is for links. The M tag is for italics. The strong tag is for bold. The code tag is the typewriter font. The image tag is to include images. The P tag is one paragraph. The section is like a heading and its content. The aside tag is a sidebar or a footnote or something else like that. The nav tag is a navigation bar. The header tag is a site header, whole page header. Footer tag is the site footer, not a single footnote. The main tag is page specific content, whatever makes this page different from the other pages on the site. The pre tag is a code block. The H1 tag is a heading for like a section. The UL tag is for a bulleted list. The U stands for unordered. The OL tag is a numbered list, stands for ordered. The menu tag is a link or button list, like a list of links. The LI tag stands for list item. The title tag is a tab name. The meta tag, that's how you set the car set or the tab item. The link tag is how you include CSS. The doc type, that's the first line of HTML. It's doc type HTML. The LT thingy is the less than character. The amp thingy is the ampersand character, and there's also a GT. The form tag collects related input elements. The label tag describes like a text box or a button or something. The input tag is a text box. The button tag submits the form. This thing is a comment.
That's a comment, yep.
Yeah, that was hard to follow along with. Table tag is for tabular data. The T head tag is for the header rows. The T foot tag is the aggregate rows at the bottom of the table. TR is one table row, goes inside T head and T foot. The TD tag is a data cell, like a normal one. The TH is a header cell, like describing a row or column. Yeah, I know it's a little hokey. You gotta follow along. It reminds me of like third grade or something. But third grade worked. How many knew how to read? Hey, okay. You probably add numbers as well. All right. So third grade, one of the top tier grades. Okay. You might even remember fractions. More importantly, I want to get this idea that you ought to actually say out loud what you think the answer is. What I want you to do when you get home, or whenever you're planning to study, look at this version of the page and try to say it out loud. You only need a word or two. You need to check that you know what it's doing. So you can see that for these, I walk through them. Some of them like super easy answer like A. Link, that's just all you need to remember. You know what a link is. You just need to remember that it's the A tag and not bizarrely the link tag. And then for some of them, I stuck in a little like what it's not. So you know the header tag is not the H1 tag. Super common mistake. And then people also confuse it with head. So super common mistake, right? So sometimes you're like, here's what I want to not confuse. All right, here's a next little question. I got 3 tiny screenshots of HTML. And I want you to implement each of these in HTML. So I'm going to give you a minute. And I want you to think through how you're going to do it. Just mentally in your head, rehearse to yourself all the tags that you would use one after another. You got a minute. All right, minute's a long time, right? So again, I heard a lot of people kind of mumbling under their breaths. Perfect. Makes you look like a weirdo, but it'll get you a higher grade on the midterm, and that's what's important in life, right? Yeah, I know. All right. So again, you probably only had time to do the first one, but that's a good thing. That means you can return to these slides when you get home or whatever you're studying, and you can do the other 2. And again, the way I have it set up in the PDF is that there's one slide with just these, and then the next slide with the questions. Okay, so let's look at the first one. Here, the first thing is that we've got a separate paragraph and a separate list. So I've got here a P tag and then an OL tag. The P tag is for that first line, the OL is for the next three. And then if you look inside the P tag, there's some italics text. So I use an EM for that because that's the tag that makes things italic. Of course, in principle, maybe you could interpret it some different way and use CSS to italicize things, but that's definitely kind of a sensible way to do it. So a P tag, and then the P tag ends at the colon. And then the next thing is an ordered list because the list is numbered, and presumably what the author means here is that the classes are the number one thing they care about. And then inside the OL tag, I have LI tags for each list item. And then the bolded part is inside a strong tag. So that's the first one. We can look at the second one. Here, these two inputs are clearly related. It would not make sense to tell the login form your username without the password or the password without the username. Because they're related, we know at least these two inputs and the button, which submits both of them, has to be in the same form tag. Here, I've chosen to put the form tag outside and the H2 tag inside. You don't, strictly speaking, have to do it that way. So I put a form around everything, then I do an H2 around this please log in. I know it doesn't look bigger or smaller, but I kind of think of it as describing all the content in here. So to me, it made sense to make it some kind of heading. I mean, H2, it's you can't really guess what level H it needs to be without seeing the rest of the page. But it's probably not the title of the whole page. So maybe it's not H1. Yes.
I'm just curious about the things.
Yeah, good question. So I also noticed that here, so remember that divs add no semantic content. So in some sense, you don't have to have them at all because they're literally meaningless. But eventually, you're probably going to style it in rows. So if you go ahead now, if in this design you didn't include those, you wouldn't get marked off for them. But like I see this, I type in that. A couple of other things here. You see that I have a label and an input. So I have the input. The input has an ID, and then I have a label and a for attribute. Now you can instead do a label and put the ID inside. Both of those are valid. Yes.
On the first one, why do we use EM and not I?
Oh, because I don't want you using I or B at all in this
Okay,
class. So that's the answer.
Okay.
Because technically, the I tag means some super weird thing about like the kind of stuff that is conventionally italicized despite not being emphasized.
Right, okay.
The one I always remember is ship names. I don't know why that's the one I remember. Probably a more reasonable one is like text in another language. But the point is that means something else, even though, yes, originally it was meant to be text. Yes.
Well, wouldn't want to be for the top one for the P for the paragraph, but we want to put that like in span, because with that causing a big gap without doing CSS between the items.
But you're going to do CSS at some point, right? Like purely stylistic information, like whether there should be a gap or not. That's not part of the HTML. In fact, if you put a span around it, the browser will implicitly wrap it in a div anyway. Right, this is just normal text that you're supposed to read. There's nothing special to it. So it's just a paragraph of text. Yes.
I was looking at the practice midterm,
Yep.
in a lot of places you have H2 tags without H1 tags, is that?
Yeah, that's because typically on the midterm, that's a little preview. You'll be writing stuff that describes a snippet of the page. And it's impossible to really guess what level heading exactly should be used, and we won't grade you like, you wrote H5, but it's actually an H4, we just didn't tell you. But there's probably some higher level headings on the page. Right? So if there is, then it's definitely not H.
Would we be marked out if we didn't use an H tag there?
I think if you use the P tag, I'd still give you full marks. But me personally, I do kind of think that this is a heading for this whole box. Yes.
If we put a div for H2 with that.
I mean, I probably wouldn't mark you off. Maybe the grader would think of that as a minor. You've probably seen that when you're being graded, some things are marked -0 points. But then like if you get enough of them, it adds up to something. Anyway, yeah. All right, cool. So here we talked about the input, we talked about the ID and how that's linked to a label. The password, obviously you're going to type a password in here, and this is a password type input form. That's the one that shows up as stars when you type in. And then I have a button at the bottom here. Looking at the last one, I've again not done any sort of special formatting. But I'm relying on you to understand what the author of this table wanted. And you know that due date is a description of this column. It's not like, there isn't an assignment called an assignment whose due date is the word due date. That doesn't make sense. This is a description of this column, therefore this row, and assignment is a description of this column. Therefore, this row is part of the table heading, so that's why there's a T head element. And moreover, these cells in the row, these table cells are TH elements because they describe other cells. They're not part of the data itself. There's always some kind of weird judgment call, like is homework 1 a description of this due date, or is it part of the table data itself? And I'm not going to mark you off for putting a TH here instead of a TD.
Is there a reason why you didn't use T body?
Basically, you don't have to. The default, if you do not write a T head or T foot or anything, is implicitly almost always doing a T body. Now, if you did, there's nothing wrong with it. I've gotten into the habit of not writing T bodies because it's the default. Other questions? Yes.
Doesn't T head act as a TR? Like, doesn't it create a row itself?
So I'm gonna give you the pedantic answer, which is no. The not pedantic answer is that if you don't write the TR, the browser will make one up. And it'll last till the end of the T head. So yeah, if you've gotten into the habit of not putting the TR, that's fine too. There's a bunch of rules for what the browser will do when you write wrong HTML, and they're reliable enough that you just get into the habit of writing some wrong ones. So again, if you drop the TR, not a problem. Though, it is legal to have multiple TH rows. That happens, sorry, multiple T head rows. That also happens, and that can be for good reasons. Yes.
Yeah, I guess this is more just like an HTML semantics question, but like, isn't having T head and TH kind of redundant? Because doesn't TH kind of say this is table of head? I don't know.
Why do they do it this way? I don't know. It is true though that, you know, you can, if you wanted to make this a TH as well, because it describes this row, that's like not crazy. I think of the difference as like what's data versus what's like description of other data, right? Assignment is definitely not data. It's not an assignment called assignment. Is homework 1 a description of this data or is it data itself? Man, that's the philosopher nonsense. Yes.
I have a question about the second question.
Yeah.
So how come the second input has type password, but then the first input doesn't have a type?
Because the default type is text, and that seems good.
Could you also put text as the type?
Sure
of the
could.
second input?
Yep. You can also put you can also put type equals, you know, just hit your keyboard. That works too, because the default is text. Yeah.
In what situations would you use a button tab instead of like an input tab with an attribute that should be?
I just never write input type equals submit. So always, I guess, is the answer to your question. Is there a difference? Mostly not. You can put like images inside of a button. So that's cool. Yeah, fun fact, you can put a button inside of a button, but don't do that. Wait, no, I think you can't put a button. I think you can put a link inside of a button. That's the one.
Well, that sounds awful.
Don't do that. Yeah, but if you are in my web browsers class 4560 in a year and a half, then you will do that. We'll implement it. All right, one more question, but I would like to move on.
That's just, I want to ask on the second one again. If you put the input inside of the label,
Then you don't need the 4 equals password and you don't need the ID.
Thank you.
Yep, either way is fine. All right, here's an exercise we're not going to be doing, but you should do this exercise at home. I'm telling you, there's one of these on the test. Okay, grab a web page, not this one, but grab a web page that you probably visit web pages in your day-to-day life. Pick any of them, pick a small part of it, like look at this sidebar. How'd you write HTML for that? I mean, I'd probably put the whole thing in an aside, and I'd probably make this some kind of header. Probably not an H1, but maybe it's like a, you know, something. And then to me, this looks like a menu. I think this is a menu because I think these are kind of links probably to like sections of the page. So, you know, just do this exercise, grab some other part, be like, oh, how did I do this header? Well, it'll probably be a header, and I see that it has 2 parts. So this is probably actually a menu. This like references HTML elements time. That looks like a menu to me, even though it's like horizontal and not vertical. And the stuff at top, like there's an image, and then I guess this is another menu. And the stuff on the right, maybe this is a form, right? Because there's a search entry.
What was a toggle for themes?
Yeah, there's a bunch of weird stuff. So like that toggle for theme, maybe this is a checkbox, or maybe it's a button or something. Yeah, you got some choices. And when you do real world web pages, you'll see that you do have choices, and we will grade you in such a way that reasonable choices will work out. And by the way, you can use ChatGPT to check your work. Give it a screenshot, give it some HTML, be like, give me 5 pointers on how to improve this, make it more submitted. Of course, if you don't like ChatGPT, you can ask your friend in the class to do the same. You can do the same website, you can swap answers. A lot of options here, folks, but you gotta do it. All right, let's move on. Yeah, these questions, think about it for 15 seconds.
On the one page, that's why people pass.
All right, so let's look at some examples of how we mark this up. The first one, text alternative for images, you just gotta stick alt equals and then your textual alternative in text. So like, I mean, the actual alt text is pretty crappy here, but this is roughly how you do it. Text in another language, you've got to wrap the text in another language in some kind of element. Fun fact, the I tag is actually perfect here. But honestly, I typically just reach for the span tag and then use the lang equals attribute. And the value of lang equals, it's 2 letters for the language, EN, FR, ES, CH. And then sometimes there's an underscore and a region identifier. So this is Spanish Español and a region Mexico. So this would be like specifically the kind of Spanish spoken in Mexico, if presumably it's relevant. You can imagine some kind of novel where people speak a regional dialect and you want to mark up this. But typically just stick with the language. Very rare that the region matters that much.
I guess it's important for like, free information.
Yeah, those Brits. Yeah, the damn British people. That's right. Yeah. No, yeah, again, so like it can matter, but it's relatively rare. Next one, a checkbox. So it's an input with type equals checkbox. That's the one you click and it makes a check mark appear. A number input that's type equals number. So like, if you have like an order form and you gotta like pick how many t-shirts you want to order, you use a type equals number. And you'd probably set like a min of 0, but that's besides the point. A date input type equals date. And more broadly, you should know the various kinds of input types that you're expected to know. There's a list in the study guide. All right, let's keep chugging. Here is a screenshot of, I don't know, some cool Wikipedia page about a rocket that I found. Yeah, rockets, and it's cool. And then we got some HTML, some bad HTML. For this screenshot, I want you to look at this HTML. I want you to find accessibility problems. I'm going to give you 20 seconds.
Side on that side, yeah. Complex fine, there's no alt text on the image.
Yeah, that's just well, you don't need like a T head or
You
whatever.
don't need that.
Well, that should be like PH, right?
All right, and I know I'm not giving you enough time to really do the whole exercise. I'm trying to get you started so that then you go back and you finish it. Okay? All right, so in this case, a couple of accessibility issues that stand out. First, that P tag at the top for the word NERBA at the top. That's not just a paragraph, that's like a heading of some kind. It describes everything inside and, like frankly, most of the page. So that should be some kind of heading, H1, H2, something or other. Then the image, there's no alt text, so that's bad. Basically, every image should have alt text. Sometimes there are images that you would describe as purely stylistic. I don't know, some kind of like just little flourish or something. And then you should still explicitly write alt equals and then double quotes with nothing inside of it. That's your way of noticing. Literally, this is pointless. This just looks pretty. And then over here, this one's kind of subtle, but you can see inside the table, country of origin. That's not part of the data in this table.
Right.
It is a description of this cell, which says United States. Therefore, this should be a TH tag, not a TD tag. And the way this, by the way, works out, like in terms of actual usage, is like Google will look at these. And it will find the relationship between them, and it'll use them to like auto suggest query results. You sometimes see that you Google something, there's like a box at the top. That says like country of origin : United States, and that designation helps Google find the right text. So another question. Yes,
So,
the one behind, yes.
so when you're doing the, like, let's say the designer one, you make a new table or you just doing it?
Yeah, I mean. I would make another row and then I'd put THTD and then another row THTD. And then I get to here. Like, okay, one thing you could do is you could open a T head and put this and then more T body over here, that's fine, or maybe this is multiple tables. I wouldn't really mark you off on stuff like that. That seems more like a question of case than.
Why is div over a side?
Oh, yeah, aside would be fine. Yeah, I mean, I think that's reasonable. I think the actual answer is that last year I didn't put aside in the list of elements you were supposed to know. And I did not update the slide, but that's a good one. If you find more things to change, that's good. We mostly won't mark you off for things that are judgment calls, whether that's, we wouldn't do this or we would. Okay, let's keep rolling. All right, we're done with HTML. Woo! All right, half hour in, that's about the marks I want to hit. Let's move on to some CSS stuff, okay? Here are 5 CSS selectors. I want you to think for 10 seconds and describe, in your head, just describe what they select. Which elements are they selecting?
Tags, find your class. That'll be a rows outside table body. Pop up element inside that is like all the tags. With a close.
The header, I'm guessing.
All 8 tags.
All right, I like the group work y'all are doing. That's good stuff. Of course, when you're doing a group where one person's talking, the other person's listening, you just gotta make sure you swap off, because otherwise the person who's listening doesn't really get any of that like study. All right, so let's go through these. Here's my answers. Body, that just selects the body element. It's a single element name. Second one, the dot means it's a class name, so it's any element with a class of description. And by the way, an element can have multiple classes. This one is a TR tag inside a T body tag, somewhere inside, any descendant, any number of levels. Though in this case, it's probably straight inside. So this is a table row inside the table body. This one, it's a tricky one. It is a link with a class of close and a class of menu. So this link, this A tag, has 2 different classes that it has to have. It can have others as well. And moreover, it needs to be a child or descendant of the element with ID pop-up. It's kind of a trickier one I might throw at you. And this one is checking our pseudo classes. This is a link that is currently being hovered over. That is itself part of a nav element. Right? Well, CSS property trivia. So each of these, there's a CSS property that changes it. We got 15 seconds.
Oh, that's not CSS property. That's not what this is. Yes.
Whether or not.
I think so, yeah.
How big the text is, it's just text.
Yeah. I think that's.
All right. Again, I know I'm cutting you short. I know you only got like a few in, I'm cutting you off, but I want to make sure we get through everything before we get to the end of the class. Because I think I have to stay out after for like 20 minutes. And all right, font, it's called font family. Is it bold? That's called font weight. Is it italics? That's called font style. And then there's the unloved child. Whether or not it's underlined, it's text decoration. It's not font decoration, it's not font underline. No one knows why it's like that. Text decoration. I know why it's like that, but it's not important. How big the text is, that's font size. So font family, weight, style, size, and then text decoration.
Awesome.
Yeah, it shouldn't be underlining stuff anyway. What color the text is? It's not font color, it's just color. That one's on the list of mistakes. The background color, however, is called background dash color. Okay, there's an opacity that tells you whether the element is transparent or not. By the way, opacity of 1.0 means opaque. Yeah. It makes sense if you think about it, but it's easy to get it wrong. So opacity 1.0 means opaque, 0.0 means transparent. I don't know why they call it transparency. I think that would have made more sense, but it is what it is. I also don't know why they didn't make it a percentage. But it is what it is. It's a number, like 0.5.
Awesome.
Okay, how thick the border is, that's border width. What color the border is, that's border color. And if you round the corners, that's border radius. There is a border property, which covers this and something called border style. But it doesn't cover border radius. That's how it is. Okay. Yes.
I got a silly question. What happens if you put like a 2 for opacity? Is it like 2 times 1?
I don't know if it's ignored or it's clamped to 1. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Well, go on. I didn't know that one. That's pretty. That's a weird detail. Keep me on my toes. All right, let's keep rolling. Some CSS definitions / concepts. So I'm going to give you more time for these because these are tougher.
Cascading.
Thanks.
Cascading style sheet. Right? So it goes through all the HTML and gives.
Oh, it's like child elements.
Well,
that inherit something, so that's why
Like what is that?
inheritance.
I don't know. It's
What
not
is the child elements? Yeah.
Is that like a real word outside of this?
We like
think-
put font family and all that, it'll go
I
on.
mean, like the ocean or something. Yeah.
Like border, like you said, border, like border.
What about inheritance?
Color, and style.
That's probably marxism.
I don't know if there's really a difference.
Is that the flex box?
But guess what's cool? It's like.
Or we haven't got there yet.
Well, if you have like a child element, that is the bigger one, it'll inherit like stuff from the parents, right? Yeah. And then shorthand properties, I think it's like top right.
Catch sort of mashed potato style little snippets of people's conversation. So I can tell one big question through everyone's mind is which one's cascading and which one's inheritance or what the difference is. So that's why we're here. All right, so not that fast. Cascading is about handling conflicts between 2 rules. If 2 different rules match the same element, then the more specific one wins. So here's an example. This one says that EM elements should be italics, but EM elements inside EM elements, nested italics elements, those should be non-italics. You've probably actually seen this in a book or something, where like a bunch of text is italicized, but then some text is upright because it's like nested. Anyway, in this case, if you have an italics element inside an italics element, both rules apply. It's both an EM element and a nested EM element. And they conflict. One rule says italics, one rule says normal. And the winner is whichever rule is more specific. So this one is more specific because it's EM inside EM. That's cascading. Cascading is a conflict between 2 rules. Inheritance is the one that sounds like it should be called cascading. That's where a property set on the parent also applies to the children. So here the HTML element, which is the topmost element, has a font family set, and this will be inherited by every single element below it, unless that element explicitly overrides it. So inheritance is where you get your values from your parents. Cascading is about multiple conflicting elements or conflicting rules. Question.
What, you said for some properties, what properties don't have?
Yeah, it's at a first approximation, all the stuff related to fonts is inherited and nothing else is. If you want like the full answer, then if you just look up the documentation for any property, it'll tell you whether or not it's inherited. It's like basically just a Boolean property of a Boolean field on every CSS property, whether it inherits or not. But like to a first approximation, text stuff does, and the other stuff doesn't. Yes.
On the Boolean, it said that like if you have 2 things that are exactly the same, like 2 EMs, then it's the physical last one in the CSS file.
Correct. Correct. It's actually there's a lot of steps, but IDs are more specific than everything else. Classes are more specific than tag names. More is more specific than fewer. So like more tag names, more class names is more specific than fewer tag names or class names. The tiebreaker is the last thing in the CSS. And there's like 3 other secret tiebreakers, or actually they're more important than the tiebreakers. I'm not going to tell you that. Other questions? All right. Third one, shorthand properties. Often one CSS property splits into or assigns a bunch of related properties. So here I wrote border : 1 pixel space solid space red. And that actually assigns the border width to 1 pixel and the border style to solid and the border color to red. And actually, when you say border color red, that actually splits into border top, border left, border bottom, and border right color, all being red. You can often tell that something is a shorthand property because you could put multiple values with spaces in between. You don't have to usually, like if you put only one value, it means something. But if you can put multiple values with spaces, typically that means it's a shorthand property. There's a bunch of weird stuff in CSS nowadays. Any questions about these? Yes.
Is there property, or can you just throw in like red, solid, one thing?
There's an order. I mean, pretty much always. Yeah. Yeah, I think there always is. Sometimes the order is weird, or sometimes like what it means when you put in just one is pretty weird. But yeah, there's an order. Especially because some of them, like margin, like it's 4 numbers: the top, right, bottom, and left margins. Yes.
Can you do border 1 pixel solid red, green, blue, yellow?
You cannot, though that would make sense.
Okay.
Why can't you? I'm in. Mistakes were made. All right, let's move on. I got the header's totally wrong. We got example values in this column. And then we got define these units in those columns. I recommend you do one of each in like the 15 seconds I'm gonna give you.
So for color, you could put like just the normal color,
Like the proportion of
line height.
Well,
Would you rem for line height?
Line height, it's just.
Oh,
Space.
0.5%, or like 1.5.
yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Or no, it'd be 125, and that makes it 25% larger than normal.
Yeah. The passage
Oh,
goes
right.
0 to 1.
And again, I know I'm cutting you off way too early. I'm just trying to whet your appetite for some studying. I'm trying to make sure that when you go home, you know you didn't finish studying. Okay, that's the secret message here. Now I'm gonna get you to study more, and then you'll do great on the midterm, and then I'll get fewer emails asking for grade bumps at the end of the semester, and we'll all be happy, okay? That's the ultimate goal here. All right, example value for color. They're named colors like black, red, purple, transparent. And then there are hex colors. They start with a hashtag, and then there's 4 hex digits. You can also do, 6 hex digits. You can also do 3, but that's sort of a more sheer feature. Line height. A lot of things you could put here, but the one I want you putting is just a number. No units, no nothing. Line height 2 means double spacing. Opacity, also a number. 0.9 is mostly opaque. Just very slightly transparent. 0.0, that's fully transparent, meaning invisible. 0.2 is like a faint outline. Border, we had an example on the previous slide. 1 pixel, solid pink. That's a solid way to put a border. No one laughed. Oh man. That bad? This is setting the border width to 1 pixel on each side. The border style, which is this obscure thing you never set to anything but solid, to solid on all sides. And you set the border color to pink. And of course, this could be like hashtag, whatever. Finally, flex grow. Why did I put 3 numbers? That's weird. Flex grow, we know that's also a multiplier. That tells you like how hungry one element is for extra flexible space. Hungry, okay, that's weird. All right, now let's describe the units. Top one is viewport height. These are confusing. These are 1/100th of the window height, of the height of the window. The window is often referred to as the viewport. I don't know why. It sounds weird. And for whatever reason, it's 100th. So it's like 1% the height. So like 50 VH is half the height of the window. Percent. This is 1/100th, it's the percentage of the parent's value. Typically, the parent's value for this CSS property, though, obscurity note, not for every property. Yeah, sometimes it bites you in the, yeah. Rem. Rem is the height of the default text size. which in theory is configurable in your browser, but is basically always 16 pixels. This is just a convenient value for stuff that's like about the same size as text. Whereas this is a convenient value for stuff that's about the size of the window. View width, that's the same as view height, but it's the width. It's 1/100th the width of the screen. And finally, px is 1 CSS pixel.
Can you give an example of say you use like 2 pixel per value of this? Because like these are just the number values you gave.
I mean, so like, there's no real reason you would use rem over 16 pixel other than you're thinking about it as like about the height of text. So, you know, if I had like you know, some kind of heading, or you know, like for example, it's a paragraph by default has 1 rem of margin, which is the same as 16 pixels of margin, but like what I mean is it has enough room to stick 1 extra line of text between any 2 paragraphs. So these are interchangeable. It's just that, you know, one is 16 times bigger than the other. But I use this for stuff that I'm thinking about as being text sized.
Can you give an example of flex grow?
Of flex grow. Yeah, I think we will in the like next or second to next. Anyway, we'll slide in the future when we look at flex. I had someone ask whether 1 CSS pixel is different from a pixel. Oh yes. Oh yes. See you after class if you want to know why. All right. Last semester, this was the hardest question on the midterm in terms of average score. I mean, not this question, but a question much like it. You get a screenshot and you're told make it with Flexbox. This tests your knowledge and ability to apply that Flexbox checklist and all them Flexbox properties. I know that you're not going to finish, but I want you to start thinking through the checklist. And if you don't remember the checklist, I want you to write in really large letters on your notepad, the Flexbox checklist. Go.
You look at the biggest element, which would be the body.
Yeah, what
And
this
then-
guy? Yeah.
Well, I guess the whole.
Did you mean-
The body should be a flex
Usually-
box with flex checklist, and the should be flex row.
And
And then the
then,
sidebar should be a flex.
Oh,
Columns. Header should be a row, flex, and it should be a line item.
yeah, the body is
Main bar should be
a row, I think, because it has elements going that way.
Would have.
Oh, main bar is a row, yeah, header is inside.
Yeah, and then, so it'd be rows, it has some columns that way, the one on this side just has sidebar, and this side
It's not
has
blue part. So that.
green bar, I guess?
Main bar is a blue.
Oh, wow.
Don't you do this for your
Yeah,
job?
well, I think that's still be a row,
Good job.
so like.
Yeah, still be a row.
Not like-
One,
I
aren't
guess,
you a
yeah,
web
that
dev already?
would be
No.
wrong.
Oh, I thought you were.
Yeah. Maybe that would be.
No, I'm not. Just one another student, man.
As
So,
usual, I'm cutting you off late enough to whet your appetite, but early enough that you're not done. And do keep in mind, again, this was the hardest class of question on the midterm being evil. You naturally know I put something like it on the current midterm. You gotta model your professors as secretly evil. You really do want to practice this one at home, and you could draw other rectangles. And then practice. I really would do this one. So here's my answer. The Flexbox checklist, the number one idea in the checklist is to start at the biggest element. I heard me say that. Start at the biggest element. I would start at the body element. And the body element, then you ask, row or column? That's the next question. So I look at the body element and I say row, because it's 2 things horizontally next to one another. So display flex direction row. Technically row is the default. If you don't write that, we won't take off, but I really would write it because otherwise you get confused. You do need the display flex. If you don't put that one, it don't work. All right, next, this checkbox, the checklist says, now you go down into one element inside. So I've got the sidebar, the main bar, you can do whichever one first. Here I've got the sidebar first. So the first thing that I think about is how it relates to its parent. So here I think about its width and its height. I'm going to start with the width because that's in the main direction, and maybe it's 200 pixels or something, right? Obviously, I didn't give you enough information to get that 100% correct. But it's got some kind of width over here, and there's clearly some kind of gap between these 2 elements as well. So I've got a gap. And there's also a gap at the edges and at the top as well. So we remember a gap between elements, that's gap around the edges, that's padding. So that's my sidebar right here, and you can see then, now we could look at how it relates to its children. It's clearly a column of children. So here I've got flex direction column. Next, let's look at this right-hand side, which is called the main bar. The main bar's got two parts, a header and a main, and we can see they're vertical on top of each other, so that means it is a column. And you also know I have a flex grow here, so what that means is that if I were to resize the parent, which is the body tag, there would be extra room should it go to the sidebar or the main content. And this flex grow means it goes to the main content. There's no flex grow on the sidebar, so that doesn't grow. Of course, there's maybe not quite enough information to do that on the exam. There will be. Next, let's look at the header, okay? The header is horizontal, so that's flex direction row. Moreover, you can see that the children are some random sizes, so they're probably just sized to content, and there's a gap between them. So I put a gap here. You'll notice I'm using rem here. Again, if you use 32 pixels, that'd be fine. And on the midterm, there'd have to be some indication of how big those gaps are, if I'm going to expect you to write down again. There's also probably makes sense to have some gap around the edges. Hard to say, but seems reasonable, so you put a padding as well. So padding around the edges, gap between the elements. And finally, you can see that any extra space here goes on the outside of the elements, not between them. So that means we use justify content center. And a couple of people, more than a couple of people last year who did justify items. Totally reasonable CSS property to hallucinate, but not one that exists. Why does it justify content, but later align items? No one knows. Well, I mean, the people who are responsible for it probably know, but they're keeping quiet. All right, final one, this main element, the blue region. We see this one also stacks horizontally, so display flex, flex direction row. Hey, don't forget the display flex. You can also see that there's a gap between them and a gap on the side, so great, there's a padding. But you'll also see that they don't, in the other direction, not the horizontal direction, but in the other direction, they don't stretch edge to edge the way that the header items did. Which means that align items has to change from its default to tell you where the white space goes in this other direction. Here I put start because the elements are at the start. You could have and, you could have second.
I just had a question on the exam, if we were expected to put any kind of gap.
Yeah, of course we would tell you. Usually there'd be some
You
extra,
don't
like,
just have to make a good guess on that.
yeah. And if you want to know what kind of exams I write, and how
matters,
evil
top
to
down.
expect your professor to be,
Hmm.
there's a whole practice midterm, which by the way is just last year's midterm. So it's exactly how evil I plan to be. I'm not trying to lull you into a false sense of security. So you could go in here, usually pretty easy to find. Hey, it's another bunch of boxes with letters. So we got some boxes with letters. Here I've got some HTML and it's going to walk you through it. And you can see that doesn't say anything about, yeah, it says ignore the small gaps between elements. So you're not expected to write that in. If there's a gap I wanted you to do, I'd maybe draw us a little arrow. And, say, and maybe there'd be text saying like all the little arrows are one rep or something.
And stuff.
Really recommend you all study this one. That's this is tough, which is why I put it on the exam again. Evil, but it is if you can, it's something that you can practice fairly easily, and it is something a lot of folks had difficulty with in the last exam. Yes.
Do we have to put a display flex everything but body, because doesn't everything inherit in body?
Okay, so that's a good question. There's a couple of reasons you're wrong, unfortunately. So for one, display and flex directional, the others are not inherited. Only text properties like font size, font weight, text decoration. Only text stuff is inherited. So yes, you have to put display flex on each and every single element because it doesn't inherit. You could write body : dot sidebar body comma dot sidebar comma dot main bar comma dot main comma header display flex that I need. And secondly, you do need to, yeah, if you don't write display flex, then the default is legacy layout, which is basically column layout. But subtly different. How? We gotta move on. So in this case, you definitely want display flex. But I guess if on main bar, you didn't do display flex and you didn't do flex direction, I'd actually have to give you the points because it probably would look similar in legacy layout. Stretch. So the default is the item stretch from end to end of the other direction. So here, notice how all the items in this column are the same width. Notice how in the header, both items are the same height. That means they've been stretched from end to end.
And you declare that with line items, just to be.
Yes, so the reason I don't explicitly write a line item stretch in these, or this one and that one, is because stretch is the default. Other questions?
So what is the flex grow doing in?
Yeah, what this flex grow does, yes, you were the one who asked about flex grow. Yes, excellent. Flex grow says, think about this body element, okay? Its width is forced upon it by the window. It knows that the sidebar is explicitly 200 pixels. How wide is the main bar? Well, the default would be as wide as the content wants to be. But here we said flex grow 1, which means any extra space that is available after handling the built-in 200 pixels goes to this main bar. So what that's telling us is if I resize the screen, this main bar changes size, the sidebar doesn't.
What would incrementing the value do?
Yeah, that's another very confusing thing about flex grow. The default is 0, which means don't. Any non-zero value means you change size. You change if there are multiple people who want to change size, it's split up proportionally to their flex grow value. Realistically, the only cases you really care about are like if you want this to be 1/3 of the screen and this would be 2/3 of the screen. This would have like a width of 200 pixels and a flex grow of 1. And this would have a width of 400 pixels and a flex grow of 2.
So you're talking in terms of width, what if you wanted it to scale like the height? Would that be?
Yeah, so the reason I'm talking about width is because the body element is a row.
Okay, so it's.
So flex grow is always talking about the main direction. Every flex box has a main direction, horizontal for rows, vertical for columns. And flex box is flexible in that main direction. In the other direction, it don't do much. You get a line items to tell you whether or not to stretch or not. That's it. If you want something like Flexbox that's flexible in multiple directions, you're gonna have to read up on grid, which is exactly that. Other questions? One more, okay.
So just by contrast along the main direction, a line items, so not along the main direction.
Yes.
When it comes to width and height, is that more just case specific for this row or column, or is one of them over the never always not?
Well, flex direction sets what is the main direction. And then like if the main direction is horizontal, then width is in the main direction.
Okay, so it just depends.
But yeah, width and height are always like width and height. There is the obscure block block size and inline size properties, which are like width and height that change. Every time I say the obscure ... that means immediately forget the rest of the sentence. All right, let's keep going. Media queries is another thing we looked at. So here I've got the same web page for these Stanley water bottles everyone loves. At one width and at a second width. So this is the same web page, two different screenshots of it. I want you to write the media query that's going to do this. Write it down, but you don't remember the syntax. Write it down.
Media something. I didn't use this in my. This is not on here. It was.
You know, it's like.
It was. Yeah,
it's like this,
but I didn't do anything that credit for it.
Is there like resizing and zero greater than 52 REM? Right. That's what they wanted you to do. Use that.
So I'm gonna do them early. So answering a question like this requires you to know a couple of things. One, you gotta know the syntax for media queries. Two, you gotta imagine to yourself how you'd achieve this layout. And then you gotta imagine to yourself how you'd achieve this layout so you know what changes between them. Here's one way that you could do it. Initially, I say that this products list is a, let's say, row at this width. And I'm gonna change it to be a column at a smaller width. So I've imagined this to have like a UL with two LIs in it. And so the UL I've specified to be a row by default. So the UL inside products, you know, whatever, probably in the exam, I'd give you the actual HTML instead of making you imagine it. So I've said flex direction row, but I'm overriding that for the more specific case. So if the width is up to 800 pixels, up to and including 800 pixels, then I actually want it to be a column instead. It's a little confusing. I wrote max width. Max makes you think big, but I'm actually talking about small. And that's how it works. So max width 800 pixels means up to 800 pixels, which means for small screens, I want it to be a column. And this is a great example of cascading, right? Cascading is the one where two rules select the same element. We got to pick which one is more specific. In this case, they have the same selector. So the last one wins. So you got to put this media query after the default. This is one use of media queries you can go with. We're switching it from a horizontal to a vertical layout. Questions? I think no questions on this one is a bad sign. You should all review your media query syntax. All right, because these are tricky. Yes.
When we're presented with a page, and we're supposed to write HTML for it, should we, like, say the alignment is different, should we write the HTML with like answer tags that we would?
Well, I mean, thinking through what's actually on the midterm, don't worry, it's not going to come up. But I won't mark off for adding IDs in classes, but you don't have to do those either. If it's a question about HTML, you just have to write the semantic HTML. You know, again, if you want to know what kind of explanations will you get on the actual midterm, here's the Mr. Beast one. Mr. Beast. Yeah, I was trying to figure out if he'd become like not cool in the last year, and I don't know. Don't tell me, I don't want to know your kid stuff. Yeah, so it says refer to the C# rendering websites, then it says write a valid header element, including children, for all of part A. Make sure to use semantic tags and all required attributes. So since clearly focused on using the right tags and all the attributes, if you stick a div in there, that has no semantics at all, so that's fine. If you stick a div instead of some semantic tag that you should have, you'll get points off. But if you just like add extra ones, we're not going to take. If you write like div 400 times, I mean, I think my instructions to the TAs would be to not take off for that, but they will grade the rest of your exam with an understanding that you wrote that for one of the questions. So think it through. And, I mean, they're the ones who have the real power, right? You think I go through every 150 exams and check every comment that they wrote for you? There's scaling issues here. Yeah. All right, other questions about the media queries? All right, good. Here's one on legacy layouts. I've got two elements with some CSS. There's 4 gaps. You got to figure out how big each of them is. I'll give you 15 seconds.
It's 18. It's top right. So the margin top of well, actually, it's that inner area would be down to 3 plus the margin. So it would be 2 plus 3 plus 14. So the top of the right would be the margin.
All right. So this is a tricky one. You've got to understand which one goes inside, which one goes outside. Padding goes inside the element, between an element and its contents, its children. Margin goes outside an element. So the padding of the A element and the margin of the B element is what contributes to this gap. The padding in the B element goes inside the B element. It's this fuzzy part in the middle. That part doesn't matter. The margin that goes outside the borders of the A tag, again, does not contribute to these gaps. And then you got to remember the order of these. These are top, right, bottom, left. Top, right, bottom, left. Is that a sane order to put them in? It's pretty weird, but you got to know the order. That's basically what the question's testing. So, for example, the top is 2 pixels top plus 11 pixels, 2 pixels padding plus 11 pixels margin. So it's 13 pixels. 8 pixels right padding plus 17 pixels right margin. 8 plus 17, 25. If you do all of this and you do the addition wrong, you will insist to me that that's all that happened and you should get more points on the exam, and I will not believe you. This is all the math that you will be required to do on the exam. You will need to add single or potentially 2-digit numbers. If this is not something you feel 100% comfortable with, this is very easy to practice. Do not let that be the reason you get points. I had one student last year who really insisted, like, no, I definitely know. But the answers she wrote down were very suspiciously not that. I have to make a series of suspiciously correlated mistakes. Yes.
Are we gonna have to know 2 and 3 parameter?
No, I'm not going to ask you what happens if I only do like 2 parameters. You need to know the case for 1 parameter, in which case it's copied. He's asking, what if you give only 1 value for margin? What if you give 2 values? What if you give 3 values? You got to know what 1 does. You got to know what 4 does. 2 and 3 I'm treating as obscurities.
So in this question, if we just put down this, we didn't, because the margin and the padding for A and B aren't in the relevant, we wouldn't be expected to label those, just.
Yep. I mean, again, on the exam, I have somewhat more room to write a clear explanation, but you need to label these gaps. Yeah, the ones with arrows. Okay. Yes.
I'm a little confused on like the A and the B, what we're pointing out. So one is like a body tag and the other is like whatever the box is.
Yeah, so the way I've got an HTML element. I didn't really tell you what the tag name is, but when I write hashtag A, I'm expecting you to understand this to mean it's some element with an ID of A, and then it's selected by that same selector, which here is hash A. Now, if it had been like body and main, and then these had said body and main, that'd be the same question. Okay, cool beans. Let's move on to Django. How are we doing on time? Ooh, a little behind. Okay, well, I will keep going until I reach the end of the slides, but if you need to go, you need to go. I get it. The slides are online. All right. Models, 2 concepts I want you to be familiar with. I'm giving you 10 seconds. I'm going to be shorter.
I'm posting, it's like query too much.
Thing.
Because you're supposed to praise one thing, but you the entire thing. Mhm.
All right. Migration. A migration is a change to the database because of a change to your model. So you add a field to your model. Now you've got a database full of data matching the old model. And you want to update it to match the new model with a new field. The migration describes how to change your database to match the change in your model. Every time you change your model, you have to make migrations and you got to run the migrations. And if someone else changes the model, they're going to commit their migrations to Git, and then you got to run their migrations to update your database according to their changes. The 1 plus n problem. The literal meaning is you make a query, and then you make 1 more query for every object that you get from the original query. And this is a classic example of performance problem. Because you're issuing lots of queries. If n is big, this is a lot of queries. Issuing lots of queries is bad. Now, if you said something like, it's when you make a query in a for loop, that's not a bad understanding of what you're doing. Probably good enough. All right, keep going. Okay, I've got a weird little video game about baseball. It's got teams. And it's got people. The people represent both players on those teams and also coaches for those teams. Each team's got a name, it's got a manager, who's a person, and it's got a list of players on that team. And then each person, they've got a name, they've got a salary, they've got a position, and I've clarified here that the position, you can think of this as just a string. So I want you to write the Django model.
So models. Class. Right. And then teams. People would point to teams because they point backwards, so people would have foreign key teams. And then if the teams gets deleted on delete cast delete.
All right, I'm gonna, as usual, cut you off early. So the first sentence says in this video game, there are teams and people. So you gotta remember the syntax for this. On the midterm, I'm gonna give you this first line. You don't have to remember that it's Django.db. You're gonna have a class team and a class person, and both of them have to inherit from models.model. And you're gonna need to remember this wacky syntax. Now, if you forget the colon, that's all right, but you gotta remember this wacky syntax. So we got two classes because there's two kinds of things. Then I say teams have a name, a coach, and a list of players. So I wrote name, and I figured names are probably short. So Carfield, and you probably want to stick a max length in there. I don't know. What's a reasonable player name length? 200, 400, man. We've also got a manager for each, or a coach for each team. We should say coach. In the exam, I'll be explicit what the field should be called. So that's a person. So each team has a foreign key to a person. All right. And then a team also has a list of players, but you've got to remember that when you have a list of or a set of or something like that, you use that with a foreign key in reverse. So here a person is on a team, and that means that a team will have a person set. It's a little weird, but it is what it is. So again, a lot of people getting this wrong or writing down like list field. That was really common, really popular last year. There's no list field, you got to do the foreign key in reverse. Okay. Then we say people, they have names, salaries, and positions. So for name, Garfield seems reasonable. Again, it's short, it's not a long piece of text. Salary, you got to remember that when you got numbers, you probably want decimal fields, not float fields, decimal fields, because the legal system runs on powers of 10. And then finally, a position, I said model that as a string. And again, that shouldn't be an arbitrarily long string. So a car field seems reasonable. And then there's a little bit of continuation of that. Here's a kind of bunch of weird situations that can happen. You got to have a manager quit, then the team still exists, but there's no manager for it until it finds another one. People can retire. When people retire, they're not on a team anymore. People can also pass away. In that case, that player object will get deleted by the system. And then finally, a team can be disbanded, in which case the team is deleted, all those players, but that's only allowed if all the players first join other teams. So I want you to add those field parameters to allow these various changes. The team and the person. So take it through 10 seconds.
I have no idea. What? I have no idea.
So let's talk these through. Since a manager can quit and the team still exists, then that means if if the manager can quit and then the team will still exist with just no manager, that manager field needs to be legal for that to be null. And Django is this weird thing where you have to set both blank equals null and true equals null. It is what it is. Persons are on a team. What happens if the team is deleted? Well, we know that if a team is disbanded, then that team object is deleted. However, that can only happen if all the players first join a different team. So in this case, we need to protect. Protect means can't delete it, can't delete the team until no such persons.
Can you just give 2 sentences more on blank versus null?
You just always write both. Except if it's a car or text field. That's why Django has this distinction. If you set null equals true on a car field, then you're allowing both the empty string and null. Which is weird and maybe what you want, but maybe not. Is it legal for a person to have a name which is the empty string? Probably not. I guess not. So in that case, maybe you want null equals true without, I don't know. Anyway, you pretty much always gonna have to.
So if the team has a person set, like, thing on it, does that mean that a person also has a team set, or?
Yes,
Yeah,
a
'cause-
person will have a team set. Which is the, well, let's see. A team points to a person. Which means a person has a team set. However, unintuitively, it is the set of teams they are managers of.
Okay, cool.
So in the person, can you the team to cascade? So like when you delete a team, you will not only delete all the person.
Okay, so we gotta think this through. If this was Cascade. If this was Cascade. If this was Cascade, that means when a team is deleted, also delete all the players. I think this is what they do in North Korea. If a team does really badly, all the persons also stop existing. But it is not what we want in our case. So the instructions, that's a little dark, sorry. The instructions explicitly say a team can be disbanded if the players first join other teams. So we should delete a team if there are players on it. The players should first join other teams. Similarly here, if this was Cascade, this would mean if the manager quits, bye-bye team. I think that's how it works in like maybe a lot of little leagues, like the coach stops showing up and that's just it. No more little league team. I don't know. I never played little league. But again, we probably wouldn't want that, right? The instructions explicitly say that if for whatever reason the manager quits, then the team temporarily doesn't have one, but it doesn't stop existing.
On the protect, could you explain just a little more on how that, so that's gonna stop it from being deleted until there's no
Correct.
people in that team?
Yep.
Before the team? Okay.
Yep, literally, if in your code you try to delete a team and there's a person on it, you'll get an exception. And it won't go through. Yes.
What is the difference between protect and restrict?
Basically none. I mean, there's some difference, but I don't remember, so you don't need to either. Another questions? Cool. All right. Little review of query methods. All right. 15 seconds.
Nice.
All right. So I've noticed there's a lot less kind of chatter of people actually trying to work through it. And I understand why that is. We're an hour and a half in. It's a really long time to stay focused on something. Two things I want to say about that. First of all, the midterm is an hour and a half long. And you probably will have to stay focused on it, but you can bring snacks. So, bring like, I don't know, whatever snacks people eat, Snickers bar, etc. If your snack happens to be a book with all the answers written on it, I will be pretty upset in a way that will negatively impact your grade. But Snickers are cool. And other snacks. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that's fine, but to try to get your brain back in gear, I'm gonna ask you to say all of these out loud. I'm gonna go through from the top, and then I'm gonna do the second column. So we're gonna go vertical. And I want you to read them with me. I'll do the first one and then try to go with me, okay? I'm just trying to wake you all up. Keep a subset of objects, that's filter. Remove
Use
a subset of objects, that's exclude. Combines the results of two queries, that's union. Removes duplicates from a query, that's distinct. Sort the object by field, that's order by. Gets the first item in a query first. Reverses the order of objects, that's reverse. Checks if a specific object is in a query, contains. Checks if any object is in a query, exists. Counts how many objects were selected, that's count. Yeah, I see some people rolling their eyes at me, but are you awake? You are now. You're rolling your eyes. The ones on the left are all queries that you can continue building clauses onto. They like return query. The ones on the right, except reverse, that's weird. The ones on the right, except reverse, these execute the query and return some kind of Python object. Like first will return like a person object. Or like exist will return. All right, let's write a couple of queries. You will be doing this on the exam. 3 queries for you to write. I'll give you 25 seconds.
People make $1 million. So it'd be all people models that object. No. Anyways, you get there and it would be.
All right, let's go through them again. I know I'm only giving you time to do the first one or something like that. That's normal. I'm trying to make sure that you've gotten started, but you haven't finished. If you finish, it's probably because you looked at the first one and you said to yourself, I know how to do that, and then you move on to the second one. No, don't do that. You don't know until you try. All right, so all people making over $1 million on the team named Cubs. I'm going to filter persons because I want all people. I want to filter them on the name of the team object. So a person has a team field and that team has a name field. You need a double underscore here. Now on the exam, there's no way to know how many underscores you intended. So we'll be generous, okay? Maybe you go out of your way to show us that there's 7 underscores. That'd be weird. Then I guess you'll get the points off. But yeah, we'll be generous about number of underscores. Team under name means the name field of the team field. Here, salary under greater than. That means the salary field, you're testing whether it's greater than a certain value, which here is 1 million. You might wonder, what if you have a field named GT? The answer is do not do that. It is a bad idea. Second query, how many teams are currently without a coach? So here we're looking at teams, that's what we're counting. We're counting teams. Want to filter to manager equals none. You can also filter for manager under is null equals true. That's also fine. That is null thing, no real reason to do it when you want is null equals true, but if you want is null equals false, that's the way you do it. And note the dot count at the end. So we want the count. We want to issue a query that counts stuff instead of loading every single one. Finally, all players managed by Bud Black, ordered by salary. Again, if he's no longer managing the Cubs, my apology, this is from a year ago. So here I want all players. So I start model.person. I don't want Bud Black himself because I assume he doesn't manage himself. I mean, maybe he does in the sense that all of us control our bowels and so on, but not really what you mean. But we want players other than Bud Black who are on a team whose manager's name is Bud Black. Now, if you wrote team under manager equals model.person.get name equals Bud Black, I would probably give you the points. But if you just do team under manager equals Bud Black, that will not work. The team manager is a person object, not a string. All right. And finally, it says order by salary in reverse because the default is lowest first. Now, if you want to order by negative salary, That's the weird syntax Django allows, that'll order, then you don't need the dot reverse. But I don't like that syntax, I just write order by salary, dot reverse. It's probably tough to remember, why is it lowest first? It just is, but like 1, 2, 3, 4 is the way things are normally ordered, right? Lowest first. Questions about queries? Yes.
So for this one, you've got first objects, you're excluding blood, you're getting the people whose team managers blood.
It's people on the team managed by someone named Bud Black. Yep.
Then, since you're looking at people have a salary, so you're ordering by that. Okay.
That's right. That's right. We're looking at people. That's why Django does the something dot something models dot something dot objects. The very first thing is what kind of objects we talking about. So here we talk about people, so it's people and it's their salary.
I forgot what it's called, but on the models, when we're like making the original model, do you want us to have like on the assignment, it was like submission event as like a reverse direction?
Yeah, you can make use of that in a query if you'd like. Yep. All right, this is the last section. I know people need to leave. I know it's late. I'm going to finish for the sake of everyone here, but all the slides are online. You can basically do what I'm doing, like MC this whole thing. All right, couple of random questions about Django projects. Where do you find all this stuff? I'm going to give you 10 seconds.
Templates. Where can you switch? Wait, rename the URL? Yeah, URL.py.
I just realized that the Kappa sorority is outside and wishes to take over this room. I think that's all the talking we have outside, so. I think we need to leave. Let's hunt, follow me, and we shall hunt for another room where we can finish.
Damn it, I went to put my laptop. There's like a little walk outside. Fucking hell. Yeah. All right, going on my field trip. What's up? Yeah. Ted, what's yours?
I'm Israel.
Was it?
Israel?
Israel?
Yeah.
That's me, man.
You should send me that.
Yeah, sure. We can get your Discord or something or number. So it works best.
Let me see. I'll just add you right now. Message or text. What's your name? Or text?
Ted, yeah, and it's Staros, and then my number is 224. Oh.
224. 234.
Oh, sorry, 224.
Oh, 224.
Yep. 456 2899.
28.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Send me a text. I'll figure out how to get that on YouTube or something.
Okay.
All right, I'm gonna. Yeah, that's on the it's on the video. All right, let's go.
Yeah, I'm gonna I'll let you do it.
Guess we're going up there. Surfing.
All right, looks like the slide is over. Where do you rename a URL? It is in urls.py and it's in the project folder. You're gonna have a project folder and an app folder. You're gonna have like your GitHub repo, and then inside it, a folder named after the project, and then another folder named after the app, and you gotta know which file goes where. So the URLs, those are global. They go in project/urls.py. There's also a project/settings.py. That's where you change settings. So like one example is where you switch from debug to production mode. Or if I ask you, where do you change the allowed host setting. I think that's the one in the, I hope that's in the practice midterm, not the actual one. Then that would be in like settings documents. Where do you modify the generated HTML? Those are in the templates, and the templates live in your app directory. So it's like app templates something.html. The controllers confusingly live in app/use.py. And then your CSS is typically not generated by a template. So it does not live in templates. It typically lives just in the static folder. All right. And we just got a couple of Django templates. So here's a generated output from a template. I want you to write the template. You probably don't remember the exact field names, but just make them up. And see the text in blue, you can assume that this team has a coach. So you don't have to write an if statement. Obviously, I can't show you an if statement. I can't ask you to write an if statement in a case like this because you don't know what the other branch would be. So I'm going to give you 20 seconds to think this through. All right, I know it's late. I'm gonna try to wrap this up. So that H1, that first thing, that's clearly the name of the team. So here I've got team.name. You know, whether the word the is part of the team name, I'm not gonna take points off for that, okay? And then you have the, and then the team name again are managed by, and then the team manager name. Now this is where that thing that said assume there is a coach, that's where that comes in. Right, because if there was no name, if the manager was null, this wouldn't show up and something weird would happen, you get an exception. And then at the end here, I had this super tricky little text where it says there are 7 players. It's exactly the kind of thing you can imagine evil professor is going to do. So we clearly have number of players here of team.playerSet_length, or you can do team.playerSet.count, which I guess would be slightly faster. Remember that if this is the set of all players whose point to team. We got the length of the player set, and then it says players, but you've got to imagine if there was one, we would want to say one player, not players. So here we do that length filtered by pluralize. It's going to output the letter S if we need one. Yes.
The linking pluralize or queries, right? Or what are those called, considered?
They're called filters.
Okay, got it. And do we need to know just those two or like everything?
That's a good question, which is hopefully answered by the study guide.
Oh, whoops.
Yeah, you got to know these 7.
Oh, never mind.
That's not crazy. You got to know those 7. Yeah, the study guide is a universal answer to all of this. What do we need? Do we need to know this or this? Which tags, which elements, which selectors, etc. It's all in the study guide. That's my contract with you on the midterm. If you know everything in the study guide, you will do great. Yes.
You mentioned you can do pipe length where you can do dot count. That seems more Pythonic to other things. Is that the same dot count that you put on queries? Or
Yeah, that's because player set and all these something underscore set, those implicitly, those are queries. Right. Okay, cool. Here's another template. Obviously here I'm trying to test your for loops. So we got 3 teams and they're either managed by someone or they do not have a manager. Make you think this through.
Fine. Oh,
All right, so let's look through the way I did this. We got 3 teams, so we're gonna want some kind of for loop, so I have 4 team in teams. And then inside this for loop that ends with end 4. Gotta remember, it's not end, it's not curly braces or something weird, 4 and end 4. Why is it like that? I don't know. And then inside this block, we can use team. So we can do team.name are managed by team.manager.name. But we remember, not all teams have managers. So we're gonna have an if statement and an else statement. If you want to do just the managed by ... do not have a manager inside the if statement, that's fine. It don't matter that much.
Would this exhibit a 1+n problem because we actually do a very different.
That is a good question, and the answer is yes. So like I would hope that when you got the list of teams, you did like .select related. Okay. Yep. Yeah, so he's asking when you do team.manager, that's traversing a pointer, a foreign key. Every time you traverse a pointer like that, whether it's into like player set or .manager, that's performing a query. So that's why the 1+n problem is a big one. I didn't even realize that this had one, but it did.
How does this say 1+n? And it's because team.manager is a foreign key lookup.
That's right. And every foreign key lookup issues a database query.
So could you rewrite this to have it not be a 1+n problem?
When you have a 1+n problem, the solution is to go back to that first query and add a .select related to it. The .select related, it's a query modifier that just says also load this extra data in the same query. So here I would do like model.team, models.team.objects. Whatever, filter by whatever, do whatever. And at the end, I'd say .select related manager, which means for each object, also load the manager field. And if the manager had a pet, it would be also load select related manager, comma manager pet. And if the pet had, I don't know. I can't come up with more fake models than that.
So when you for loop through that data, is it like a tuple where it's on the team and then the
Nah, it's sort of mysteriously the same exact code. The select related just means load some extra information now because I'm going to need it later.
So then you could do team.manager.
You'd still do team.manager.name in the exact same. Yes. The upshot of this is that like all of these objects, they cache in various ways. And you're just saying load the data now. That saves you the effort of making a bunch of queries. You can ask, why doesn't Django always select related everything that I might need? But then you're loading data you don't use, which is also bad. Other questions? Cool. All right. And a Django controller, we want one that returns the previous HTML. And we assume that that template is located in managers.html. So some basic controllers. Gotta remind yourself, you're gonna need to know Python syntax, Django stuff, etc. All right. So here's my little controller. It's a function called managers, because it says write a controller named managers. Every controller takes the request argument first. It can also take some number of other arguments that will come from the URL. It always takes the request argument first. Then you do some kind of queries. So here I did models.team.objects.all. I didn't really explain which teams, so let's just say it's all of them. And then this part is also super important. You render the template that uses the render method. About the render method, you should know the first argument is always the request argument to the controller. Always. Second argument is the HTML file that the template is located in with no templates slash. Third, you need to know you must return the result of render. That's another easy way to lose a point. And then the last argument is a dictionary variable name for the template, colon, Python value to use. So it's typically like variable name colon, same variable. Because it's convenient to use the same variable name teams on both the template and the controller. But if for some reason you don't want to do it that way, you don't have to do it. And the key here, that must come in quotes. If you forget the quotes, then it's a dictionary where the key is a list of teams, which is not good. I think that just causes an exception. Though frankly, query sets are weird, so who knows? Yes.
What do you think about using a variable, like it's a variable versus making it?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, I have never done that, but it's legal. If you want to do like, CTX equals this dictionary and then put like comma CTX at the end, that's fine. If you write Python code that's like super duper confusing on the final, but technically it is correct, then we're probably going to grade it wrong, and then you could submit a regrade request where you are full of righteous anger. And then you can argue with the TA like in multiple rounds over why you are correct. I've never had that happen. I'm sure it's fun. I mean, for you, not for the TAs. Remember, don't piss off the TAs. Also, if it's a really confusing bit of Python code for the TA, you'll probably make a mistake while that'll be really funny for us. So, high risk, no reward strategy. But yeah, you can totally do that. You can move the dictionary. I mean, you can put the file name on its own line as well. Like I wouldn't, but you could.
For select related here, would it just be?
You'd stick dot select related manager at the end of all.
It would just be manager, not model, not manager.
It would be the string manager. It's the field name. Why is it like that? Django really loves stuff in strings in places. I will say the previous version of this class from 2 years back used ASP.NET. It does not like using strings. It instead likes using these field objects. It's even worse. So pick your poison. Okay, other questions about controllers? Good. We're done. That's the last slide. We have finished my in-class midterm review. But I hope that you have not finished your midterm review. Okay, what are we going to do when we get home or at some point over the week, over the next